Welcome to OTT Talks, a series of conversations with think tankers, policymakers, and experts around the world. This episode is part of a series of discussions with European think tank leaders to reflect on the nature of their work in a changing Europe. My name is Enrique Mendizabal, and I am co-hosting this session with Goran Buldioski. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Karolina Wigura from Kultura Liberalna, a think tank and foundation based in Warsaw. But first, Goran, why don't you set the scene for our discussion today?
We're recording this series with the directors and founders of think tanks in Europe with a very simple, straightforward goal. A lot of advice and a lot of experiences of working in think tanks have been issued from those in the developing country context. Thanks to many foreign donors, their stories, be it of success or failure, have been well documented. But we realize that actually in Europe, both East and West, not sufficient material has been documented about the think tanks. While actually there is a very rich experience, and that experience continues beyond those transition years. Especially given that these countries have joined the club of relatively rich or rich countries, while politically they're far from having a stable environment with the domestic funding for think tanks. We thought will be interesting to talk to the leaders and see what have been the successes, challenges, and failures in the past couple of decades.
So after this introduction to the series, let me welcome our guest. Karolina Wigura is a co-founder and currently member of the board of Kultura Liberalna, which means liberal culture, a think tank, publishing house, and a foundation based in Warsaw. She is also a senior fellow at the Center for Liberal Modernity in Berlin and assistant professor at the Faculty of Sociology at the University of Warsaw. She's a historian of ideas and sociologist by training. She frequently provides commentary on Polish and international politics for print and electronic media, including The Guardian, New York Times, and many others. Welcome, Karolina.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
Hi, Karolina. Great to have you on this podcast. As we expect to have a lot of think tank leaders and people who work with think tanks or support think tanks around the world to listen to this podcast series, we would like to begin by briefly describing the political context in which Kultura Liberalna operates. Given that describing the political situation of Poland could take a separate podcast on its own, let's start with something more lively. If you try to describe your country context as a movie, as a film, which one that would be?
Thank you, Goran. That's a wonderful question. Actually, because I knew that the question is going to be posed, I took the liberty of asking my colleagues from Kultura Liberalna what they think. And listen, they were extremely into pop American culture. They said being in Poland and creating an NGO and a think tank in Poland basically is similar to being Indiana Jones. So this implies that we are extremely handsome, extremely skillful, and very knowledgeable, and we are courageous enough to solve any problem. So this is their opinion, which I am rephrasing here. But I would like to add something else. There is also another American film, which I think is very much more appropriate when you ask about the political context of changing Poland in changing Europe after 1989. And it's a film by Elia Kazan, which is called America, America. So as you probably remember, this is a film in which the main protagonist, a Greek, comes as an immigrant to America, looking for the imaginary West, which he wants to discover and he wants to be a part of it. And I don't want to make too many spoilers, but basically the end is like the end of The Wizard of Oz. He finds America, but it's not there. And I do believe that this is exactly the experience of Poland. We have been trying to jump up, to live up to get better to return to the West as we have imagined it. And when we have arrived, we actually discovered that there is no West, that the West has, in the time we were struggling, the West has abandoned its values. And that the values that we believed in are now scattered. And surprisingly, now it's Poland that is being pointed at and said, this is now Poland, which is going to be the leader of the West. So I think what comes out of it is a huge feeling of ambiguity. And I would say there is a strange satisfaction in it, but at the same time, there is a worry that this fascination with Poland comes from the same ignorance that first was the reason for saying for decades that Poland is a country created by post-communist Sovietikuses, Homo Sovietikuses.
That's really interesting. There's a bit of a sense of innocence lost, right? So it's the realization that life, that reality isn't what we hoped or we expected. It is something else. But what you're describing is interesting. Is in the period in this period that Poland has been going through its own changes, right? In pursuit of an ideal, that place that held those ideals has also been going through changes, and now they are very different to that ideal that Poland was sort of maybe struggling towards, and it's not clear who's who is in who's in not who's in the right, but who is the bearer of those values or those ideals anymore. That's an interesting reflection.
That's right. Perhaps it's innocence lost, or perhaps it's simply some mythos lost. Probably the mythos can be a very powerful incentive for creating a collective change. And probably in this particular case, this generalized mythos of the West has been a very important incentive. Especially that Poland came out of communism exactly like the other countries and nations of Eastern Central Europe, with a generalized sense that we are not equally worth. So, as you know, the decision to divide Europe into the democratic part and communist part was not our decision. But still, we bared the feeling, the experience of being not only less affluent, but simply extremely poor, of being somehow responsible for the fact how our countries looked like, even if this wasn't our decision. So yes, so I do believe that it all contributed to creating a very powerful imagination of the West that we have been since 1989, that we have been chasing.
Interesting. Karolina, before going into a reflection of the changing role of think tanks in this context that you've described, and to get a better sense of your organization, can you help us understand your organization, which issues a weekly magazine, publishes books, stops as a foundation? Can you describe it? Maybe explain to us, why this particular combination of roles or functions, and maybe what came first, should we get a sense of it?
First came a home seminar, but it wasn't in our biographies. It wasn't actually even to use political political language. It wasn't even our term. Home seminar is something that has been created in Poland after the partitions. So after 1795. And a lot of generations of intellectuals in Poland created a kind of an intellectual landscape where it is where younger generation is somehow educated by older masters. So unofficial seminars, home meetings basically lasted in the 19th and 20th century. And Kultura Liberalna started also with a home seminar. It was a home seminar created for us by our mentor and professor, Professor Paweł Śpiewak, a Polish intellectual, centrist, but slightly more on the liberal side of the landscape. And he worked together with a colleague who very much leaned into the conservative part of the political scene, Józef Orzeł, who now is also very close to Jarosław Kaczyński. So, as you can imagine, this was a very bizarre and interesting constellation of two people actually being on two sides of the political spectrum, but somehow eager to not only to read the same philosophical texts with us, and we read Hannah Arendt, Alexis de Tocqueville together. We basically read through the most important philosophical texts of the 19th and 20th century. But they were not only eager to read the same texts, they were also courageous enough to show the differences between them whilst they were talking to us youngsters. So it was a profound experience that lasted, in our case, for 10 years. And what we didn't know is that they themselves were previously also students at the same type of home seminars, but led by Jerzy Jedlicki and Leszek Kołakowski and Bronisław Baczko. So as you see, there is this generational endeavor here, which is the background of Kultura Liberalna. And creating a magazine, a periodical, would be a very traditional thing to do by such intellectuals.
Right.
So before we created Kultura Liberalna, there was already Respublika created by Marcin Król. So from the generation of fathers and our fathers, our mothers. And so Kultura started first as a periodical with this very strong intellectual ethos of understanding the political reality, but at the same time to adjust to the new time. And instead of doing home seminars, we created mostly a periodical. So this is how it started. But then things that we were also doing and are also doing, like publishing books, is also something which has been traditional, very traditional in this generational responsibility of the intellectual scene. So you might say that the way Kultura Liberalna evolved is a result of a meeting of the past and the present, of the past and the future, namely the past being the tradition of intellectual seminars in Poland, and the future being new media, online publishing, the so-called social media, where you have to be present in order to be heard nowadays.
This is a beautiful story of origin, I have to say. It's very nice. And it reminds me of the origin of some think tanks in Latin America as well, which follow a similar path. we copied in Latin America the societies or friends of the country, kind of these learned societies from Spain that did something like that, brought together intellectuals, who then published a periodical and then maybe presented it in public. This is from the late 1700s, early 1800s. So it never became what you are describing now, and I think the tradition was lost. But you are describing is something very interesting, right? You're right. It's a traditional way of generating, communicating knowledge, making sure that it goes from one generation to the other. But now, through other means of engagement and communication, you are reaching new audiences through a more formal series of processes. That's really interesting.
Yes, and at the same time, if I may add, the traditional home seminars and the more traditional periodicals would be in Poland very much concentrated on Poland. So everything through the lens of the Polish history. If you, for example, analyze such émigré periodicals like Kultura, created in Paris after 1945, it is not, the global thought is not absent there, but everything is in context of Poland. But in our biographies, I speak now of me and of Jarosław Kuisz, with whom we created the weekly. Another intellectual experience was fundamental, and this was University of Oxford. So this small and provincial town, which is one of the most global villages that you can actually imagine. I think this allowed Kultura Liberalna as an intellectual community to understand that what we have to say might be relevant, not only for our own troubled or tortured country, tortured with its own politics and very often by itself, but also very relevant to the global discussion on democracy and populism, and about values that I have previously mentioned, where they are going and how they are changing. So this is where the intellectual presence of Kultura Liberalna abroad, so in a generalized scene of the American, British, and French and German media comes from. It comes with this engagement into creating a public sphere, which is not only a nation state public sphere, but also a global one.
Very interesting.
That's both interesting and fascinating, Karolina, because listening to this, it's interesting how against that context, think tank and as well the new media is seen as a sort of a pathway to a more progressive debate and expression of opinions. Also, it's interesting in the context of what Poland is known for and what is not. Even you mentioned that your two professors that were doing these home seminars were not exactly established liberals. They were more, interested in reading and critiquing, and probably
conservative liberal and conservative Catholic.
Exactly. And that's exactly what Poland is better known for, along its own economic success as one of the economic wonders of the Eastern Europe. If you look against that context, you establish a liberal think tank, a liberal publication as a kind of a minority stakeholders in that society. And when you look back at your work, what can you say that you've done well? What did your think tank and Kultura Liberalna altogether did well? And also on the flip side, what you could have done differently in the last 15 or so years?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I tend always to be more interested in the failures than what we did well. Like in the saying, fail again, fail better. So this is a great question. Well, I think what we did well is essentially three things. So the first thing is that we have established what we planned to do, namely a stable and sustainable platform for liberalism understood as pluralism and a certain respect to democracy and the rule of law. So this is point number one. Point number two, we have survived financially, and I think it's an extremely important element if you just imagine that in Poland after 2015, it was impossible, of course, to obtain any state-funded money for a liberal NGO. So a financial model for this think tank has had to be a very sustainable and differentiated one. And this is where we succeeded. And then third, we have introduced, I believe, both to Polish and to global public debate, a couple of concepts that have been very very useful. Just two examples of that. In Poland after 2015, the debate basically turned into a very worrying direction, worrying for us, namely that what happened to Polish democracy just fell out of the sky. Just out of the blue, we had this terrible black swan of Jarosław Kaczyński that was just destroying everything inside. Our argument, which was extremely unpopular at the time, was that actually liberals earned it. They have behaved in a way that actually created the need for Kaczyński. It has been, as I said, very unpopular at the time, but with time, it contributed to a certain change of intellectual atmosphere in Poland, and it contributed also to the victory of liberal democracy in 2023. So this is in Poland. In the global debate, we have been constantly reminding about the values and knowledge that is coming from East Central Europe, and most recently about the sources of knowledge of East Central Europe about Russia and the imperial character of Vladimir Putin's politics. So we were able to explain why East Central Europe had the experience, had a historical experience from which a certain knowledge about the dynamics of Vladimir Putin's Russia derives. So this is what we did right. Now, as for the failures, where we can fail better, I do believe again a couple of things. One, two, three. The first, I would say, we were not fast enough, I believe, to grasp that populism is not only an episode, but rather a symptom of a deeper change, which is transforming the political reality in which we are living. We were able to see that populism is nothing to be neglected, but I do believe that not fast to grasp that we are living through a time where every central notion of political thinking is actually being transformed. So political power, for example, public sphere, freedom, everything every of those notions has been profoundly changing under the influence of new technologies, and I would like us to have seen it earlier. I'm working now on a book about it for the Surkamp Publishing House, and I'm very grateful for the chance to reflect and write about it now, but it could have happened earlier, I believe. So this is point number one. Point number two, so you said that it's a very beautiful origin story that I have shared, but there is something more to it. I believe that there is a constant challenge of intellectuals trying to be heard on a broader scale. And I think we are still struggling with how to communicate with a broader audience. We do have a very broad audience, but at the same time, I think it could be much better. The third part where we also have failed. There is one thing which still seems a place of no satisfaction when I observe the dynamics around liberalism and liberal democracy and populism today. And this is the eagerness for the liberal democratic side to help its own civil societies, institutions to thrive financially. So when we compare how much the populist milieus are capable and eager to help financially, even on a very small individual basis, we will see that they are much better. They are much better. They are much more eager. They are much more mobilized. It doesn't happen on the liberal democratic side, and I think it's there must be something about communication here, and I would like to do it better. So here is the plan for the next 10 years.
Before we jump into that, that's very interesting. But something that strikes me is you've described both in the successes and the failures a sense of a changing landscape, changing context, right? That either you didn't see coming, or that others have taken advantage of, what not necessarily your organization and maybe others on your ideological sort of side. Could you reflect a little bit on that, in reflection of the role of think tanks, or the roles that think tanks have played, and how those have changed or should have changed in this period? And I'm gonna sort of suggest, is there a changing of the idea of a think tank in Poland in the last 20 years or so? Do people see think tanks in a different way? They expect them to play a different role now than before?
That's again a very good question. As for the feeling that there is a profound change going on, so I believe that my social group, or my community, my intellectual community, my intellectual formation, would say that the most important rupture in the history of the 20th century that has contributed to creating the world we live in is, of course, the Second World War, understood in East Central Europe in a very specific way. So it's not only one totalitarian system; it's both. It's both. You don't compare them in East Central Europe. You basically, it's a common understanding that they were both equally horrible. So Nazism and communism, and that we have, from this horrible rupture and the horrible mass killing, we have somehow created something better. slightly better, at least, as much better as the human nature allows. And I do believe that several generations after the Second World War, including the generations in East Central Europe after 1989, believed somehow that the rupture is behind us, and the change of the world is already behind us. That now we are building on something, whereas the most important lesson about what is happening in politics today globally is that this rupture, this discontinuity of traditions, this gap between the past and the future actually occurs in every generation. And our generation has it perhaps most strongly with the rise of populism and the complete change of what we live in today. It is the world of corporate dominated means of communication. So I think the rupture is very much there. And at the same time, to answer the second part of your question, it has also very much changed the landscape of think tanks, at least in my country, where, as you have already seen, the public space has been dominated by intellectuals. This is a very intellectual setting. And those intellectuals were often engaged in politics, but they were actually first intellectuals and then activists. Whereas today it's different. It's just the other way around. NGOs are thought to be, in the first place, organizations of activists. Activists are very often considered to be intellectuals, but it doesn't work the other way around generally. So it's a very different setting. So to convince the public that activists are extremely important, but you also have to have this intellectual scene, is a new challenge, I believe.
And just to finish before we go on a short break, do you think the concept of think tanks has that changed a bit? So in the minds and the narratives of these actors, these intellectuals, these activists, has it evolved? Has it been rejected now? Is it being embraced?
I don't know. I think it has become a kind of a bag or a basket into which we throw everything,
Right.
All the eggs that we actually can imagine. But so you can find there very, very extremely important activist organizations that, for example, provide necessary protest mobilizations. You can find there organizations that are providing alternative ways of creating policy. They are writing reports, they are writing strategies and providing them, for example, to various ministries. But you also have intellectual communities there, and so I don't think it's the meaning has changed. I think the meaning has become much more chaotic than before.
It has expanded and has accepts
expanded.
more roles, more functions, more types of organizations, right?
Which doesn't have to be something bad.
No.
It just calls for a certain consciousness of the field that we are present on.
It is time for a break. But when we return, we will explore the future of think tanks in Poland and in the region with Karolina. We are back after a short break. So let's continue with a question on the the think tank, the impact of the think tank on Karolina and her colleagues, and the strategies they pursued to make sure that this is a successful initiative. But let me start with a somewhat of light touch question, Karolina. If your think tank was a song, which song would it be?
Again, this is a wonderful question. And again, I have two answers, not one. So probably if we have been thinking about it a couple of years ago, more than a couple, perhaps 10 years ago, I would say that that we are the song of the T-Rex group, the Children of the Revolution group song. So this is a song which is full of this revolutionary energy of people that are that come back with their experience to something thrilling and beautiful. But then, how long can you be a child of the revolution if you have too many white hair, as I do? You cannot be a child of the revolution anymore. So today I would say we are probably much more someone from the beautiful song by Brian Ferry, which is called Newtown, and it comes from the album Bittersweet. This is a song about a person who comes to a new town, which is a source of hope, and then everything, of course, happens again. Whatever his or her experience was, and the experience was quite dramatic. So I believe that this is the experience of Kultura Liberalna, and it overlaps very much with my own experience as a person that has been living in various countries of Europe throughout the past 25 years. So my socialization is very Polish, but my secondary socialization, if you like, is very European. And wherever I lived, the same story was happening again. So first, it was populism in Poland in 2015, and then it was Brexit, observed from Oxford, and now it's the alternative for Germany, observed the rise of it, observed in Berlin. And it's still the new town, and it's still the same trend of something developing, evolving on our eyes, and trying to do whatever we can to grasp and understand the moment.
Thank you, Karolina. I would like to. We spoke a lot about Kultura Liberalna, and I would like to check a bit more about your own personal experiences. I mean, you talked a lot about the challenges, the successes, the better failures, and about the context in which you work. How have all of those affected to you as an individual? What has been the best part of your work as a leader of a think tank and in this collective that you just described? And what has been maybe the most challenging part to be part of the same collective?
As an individual.
As an individual, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As co-founder of a think tank, as a leader.
I think that the most beautiful part of it is the development of the understanding of freedom. As you have mentioned, I'm trained as a historian of ideas, so I think with my great dead friends. And as a young student, I read about political freedom as understood by Tocqueville, that you are capable of co-creating things, that you can step up and take part in something, that you have the freedom to do it. And I do believe that creating Kultura Liberalna was on the individual level, it was this wonderful experience of political freedom. So that you can coin ideas, you can develop ideas, and then you can insert them into political debate and watch them very often completely misunderstood, but also very often inspiring some people who are taking them further. So this is this aspect of freedom. It is also, to quote another wonderful dead friend, Hannah Arendt, a great experience of connecting vita activa and vita contemplativa. So at the same time, I had to learn how to work with people, how to communicate with them, how to empower them, and how to give feedback to them, which is not only uncritical. But at the same time, I had the great privilege of spending my time on thinking and on reading and on writing, which has produced this particular individual you're talking to. So this is perhaps part of the answer.
Thanks. Let me probe you in something else, which you mentioned earlier on and really got my attention. Also, let me say selfishly, because I've been talking quite a lot about that. When you mentioned that the conservatives are more eager to put their money where their values or their mouth is, rather than the liberals and the progressives. And I'm saying this with a kind of a dose of sadness, because you would expect that it will be the other way around. What about the sort of the funding and the sense of independence? You know, when you want to secure funding, always there are donors, private foundations, governments, EU, other agencies, you name it. What is this? How has been this delicate balance between maintaining the independence of thinkers as an organization and securing funding against the backdrop that you described?
As Kultura Liberalna is founded in a very differentiated way, I don't think this has ever been too much of a challenge. It was quite obvious to us that we are not that we are not planning to become victims, as it is called in my country, grantosis. So a certain sickness of think tanks which only perform projects that are fashionable at the moment. And it was quite obvious, especially after the Oxford experience, because I have also experienced how the University of Oxford is fundraising, and it is very obvious there that you can, of course, contribute with your money to Oxford, but you will never have any influence on what they are saying. So it has been very similar in Kultura Liberalna. We have kept it. We have kept the how to say, the size of the organization is being kept relatively small, which is a certain surprise to many. In the wonderful other think tank, Centrum Liberale Moderne in Berlin, the colleagues sometimes make this joke that they say, so in Kultura Liberalna, you are probably so big because you're capable of putting all those public publications in the New York Times, etc., etc. And then I say, listen, we have only 2 rooms. It's just 10 people. So it's relatively small, but it's also small with a thought that it's better to be small and have priorities well defined than to grow into a chaotic organization which doesn't have so much contribution to the public debate anymore. So for all those reasons, some some answers to the challenges you have just named were quite obvious from the beginning. We have never been challenged also by anyone who would try to influence what we are saying or writing.
Interesting. It's a call for smaller organizations. We often talk to think tank leaders that sort of reflect on the size of organizations, and there's that sweet spot, as you may, in some ways you're alluding to, right? If you're too small, it's hard to keep going. If you're too big, then you need to invest a lot on systems and processes, and the intellectual work might sort of become detached a little bit, or be a sort of, not a priority anymore. Connection to values might be not a priority, but finding that sweet spot is important.
Just to interrupt, I'm sorry, but just this is a thought that just came to my head. It's, a think tank, which is usually an NGO, formally, is also always going to be difficult. It's not that if you grow very big or if you stay at some particular level, it will become easy, because it's always this passionate defense of the budget that you have, and the wonderful people that are working with you. And it says something also about the nature of freedom I previously commented on, namely that freedom, which means in the case of think tank, is shaping your life independently, which is very pleasant but extremely painful. So there is this pain. It's part of this freedom. It's like the character of the Andersen's tale of the siren. Am I saying correctly? Of the siren who wants to have legs. So she does get the legs, but she is in constant pain. And it's exactly with think tanks. It's you can exist, but it will never be easy, because there is no set budget for you, and there is no set space for you. So you basically have to fight all the time, but then it gives you the equal amount of happiness connected with this intellectual existence.
That's a great thought, and very inspiring for anybody who wants to venture into the world of think tanks, now or in the future. Can you maybe reflect, as a way of concluding? Can you reflect on the future role of think tanks? So we've talked about the changing context. We've talked about the changing functions or roles of think tanks, successes and failures. The pleasure with the challenges of working in a think tank. How do you see this sector evolving into the future in the next 10 years or so, if we could look so far ahead?
So I think it will be extremely difficult on one hand, which is perhaps somehow mirrored by what is happening to Kultura Liberalna today, in the context that we have now, in the context which is at the same time very national and very global. Namely, for example, for a week now, there has been a troll campaign against Kultura Liberalna on the Polish as part of the platform X. Now, those people who are connected with the right wing, or rather peace, law and justice parties circle, those people, how they call it, they reveal, quote unquote, the sources of our financing, like, for example, National Endowment for Democracy. And they also reveal our public articles in the American periodicals like Foreign Policy or the New York Times, criticizing populism. And they, quote unquote, use an argument that we should be eliminated from the public debate. So it is going to be difficult and nasty. Luckily, the the reaction of the public, of the readership of Kultura Liberalna is wonderful. We have been receiving more donations throughout the past week. People feel responsible, and I'm extremely grateful for it. But it's going to be difficult. We have to challenge. We have to face it. On the other hand, listen, there is such a wonderful task for us today. The task is to redefine political realm again in this new global dynamics that we live in. The task is to redefine what public sphere is. If we are all using platforms that actually stand now on one side of political spectrum. The task is to redefine freedom, what it actually is today. What is democracy? What is populism? It's a wonderful task. I cannot wait really to work on it, and I'm working on it on a daily basis. And so I'm very grateful that the times we live in provide such a purpose for us.
Thank you, Karolina. This list sounded to me as a kind of a list of advice for any new leader of a think tank, of what they could focus and do that. Do you have anything else, maybe more at the personal level, what advice you would give to leaders of think tanks, as we expect people who will tune in and listen to this podcast that are engaged in think tanks and have aspirations on their own?
I think on the individual level, I would like to share one more thing, which is also quite natural for me as a historian of ideas, namely a great dead friend, Aristotle, believed that politics is about friendship. And I'm not sure about politics as such. I'm now reading Politics on the Edge by Rory Stewart, and I constantly doubt whether politics is about friendship as such. But thinking about politics and creating think tanks is surely about friendship. And this is one more aspect of what I have been experienced throughout the past 16 years, namely that the friendships that have been created with people who either work in Kultura Liberalna or are around on an orbit of people who surround and contribute intellectually. This is something extraordinary. And again, I'm very grateful for it. And this is something also to share. The think tank, creating think tanks is also about friendships.
Thank you. At least relationships, right? Even if you fail to make friends, relationships clearly matter. I think in your description of the origin of Kultura Liberalna, you've described about relationships, intergenerational, across the aisles of ideological thinking, and you've described your relationship with the readers of your publications, right? Not just with anonymous funders, but individuals that know your organization and are responding to threats that it's facing. So I think that's a very positive and enlightening message to finish. Thank you much, Karolina. This has been fantastic. I have learned a lot. I will certainly follow up with many, many more questions.
Thank you so much. It was an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. The series continues with think tank leaders from across the South and East of Europe and the rest of Europe. And you can find the episodes wherever you listen to your podcast or visiting our website on thinktanks.org. From Goran and me, thank you very much.